At my housewarming party, my mother-in-law announced, "This house is too nice for you. You should let my son have it instead." I laughed until she handed him a fake ownership contract. My husband's next words left her screaming. I still can't believe this happened. Even writing it down feels surreal. But I swear to you, every single word is true. So, for some context, my husband, Mark, and I had been married for 5 years. We weren't rich, but we both worked hard and made smart financial choices. I grew up in a blue-collar family, and I've always been careful with money. Mark was raised by a woman who believed her son should be treated like royalty. His mom, Diane, was the kind of person who thought her son could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I was never good enough for her. Diane had spent our entire marriage trying to control Mark. She criticized everything I did, from my cooking to my job to the way I dressed. But Mark always stood up for me, which only made her hate me more. Fast forward to the house. It was my dream home. After years of saving, budgeting, and working extra hours, I had finally bought my first house. Yes, I bought it. With my money. My name was the only one on the deed because Mark had some past credit issues that made financing tricky. We both agreed it made more sense for me to handle it. But of course, Diane saw it differently. The moment she saw the house, her nose wrinkled like she had smelled something bad. "This is too nice for you," she scoffed, looking around. "Are you sure you can afford it?" I should have known then that she was up to something. A week later, we hosted a small housewarming party for close friends and family. Everything was going fine, until Diane decided to make an announcement. She tapped her wine glass with a fork and cleared her throat dramatically. The room fell silent. Then she smiled and said, "This house is too nice for you. You should let my son have it instead." The entire room froze. I let out a laugh, assuming she was joking. But Diane wasn't laughing. She turned to Mark and pulled out a stack of papers. "Here you go, sweetheart," she said sweetly, handing him a fake ownership contract. I saw my name, crossed out with a black marker, and Mark's name written in its place. I was stunned. She smiled at me, her eyes gleaming. "Since you put Mark's name on the mortgage, I figured we could just make it official," she said. Except I didn't. Mark's name wasn't on anything. The house was mine. Mark looked down at the papers, then back at his mother. And then he said the words that made her scream. Mark stared at the fake contract in silence. His expression didn't change, but I saw the way his jaw clenched. I knew that look. He was pissed. Diane must have mistaken his silence for hesitation because she patted his arm and said, "It's what's best for you, sweetheart. This way, you'll have security. You deserve a home like this." And she gave me a sharp look, "Can always find something more," her sighs. The room was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat. Everyone was watching, waiting for Mark to say something. Then, in the calmest voice, he asked, "Mom, where did you get this?" Diane beamed like she had won something. "Oh, I had it drawn up by a friend. It's perfectly legal." I finally snapped out of my shock. "Legal? You think you can just cross my name out and replace it with his? That's not how property ownership works." Diane rolled her eyes. "You wouldn't understand. This is about protecting my son." Mark exhaled slowly and set the papers on the kitchen island. Then, very clearly, he said, "Mom, I don't own this house. I never have. And I never will. Because it's not mine, it's hers." The second the words left his mouth, Diane's entire face twisted. "What?" Her voice went sharp. Mark shrugged. "Her name is on the mortgage. Her name is on the deed. I don't own a single square inch of this house." Diane blinked rapidly, as if her brain couldn't process what he was saying. But that's not possible." Mark let out a short laugh. "Of course it is. You think I'd let you pull this stunt if my name was on it?" Her eyes darted to me. "Tell me he's lying." I crossed my arms. "He's not. I paid for it. I own it. End of story." Diane's hands clenched into fists. "This isn't right. A man should own the home, not his wife." A few people in the room gasped. Mark's best friend, Dave, actually laughed out loud. My cousin muttered, "What year does she think this is?" I expected Mark to get mad. I expected him to yell. But instead, he just smiled. And that's when I knew something was coming. "Mom," he said, voice dripping with amusement, "you're not actually mad about the house, are you?" Her lips pressed together. "Of course I am. This is supposed to be yours." Mark leaned forward, lowering his voice so only she could hear. But I was standing close enough to catch it. "No," he murmured, "you're mad because you were planning something. You thought if my name was on it, you could take it from me." Diane's face went pale. The air in the room shifted. Silence stretched for a long moment before Diane snapped. "How do you speak to me like that?" she shrieked, slamming her hands onto the counter. "I am your mother. I know what's best for you." Mark didn't even flinch. "Do you?" I watched her closely, my heart racing. Something wasn't adding up. This wasn't just her usual controlling behavior. She had a plan. And suddenly, it hit me. I took a slow step toward her. You were planning to put the house in your name, weren't you? The second the words left my mouth, her eyes widened. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. That was it. That was her goal. She wasn't just trying to get Mark to take the house. She wanted to steal it for herself. Diane's eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Mark turned to me, realization settling on his face. Oh my God, he muttered. She was. The room shifted again. The silence wasn't just awkward now, it was dangerous. Everyone was waiting for her to speak, to explain herself. Then, like a switch had flipped, Diane let out a high-pitched laugh. It was forced, brittle, and completely unnatural. You two are being ridiculous, she said. Waving a hand like this was just some silly misunderstanding. Why would I want your house? I crossed my arms. That's a good question, Diane. Why would you? A flicker of something passed across her face, panic, before she quickly smoothed her expression. I was just trying to help my son, she said sweetly, but there was venom underneath her words. A real wife wouldn't put herself above her husband like this. A real wife would make sure her husband was taken care of. Mark let out a sharp laugh. You mean like Dad took care of you? Her head snapped toward him. Oh, that hit a nerve. I watched as her face twisted, her nostrils flaring. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Don't bring your father into this, she hissed. Mark shrugged. Why not? You spent my entire childhood telling me how he left you with nothing. You used him as a warning, remember? Never let a woman control the finances. Never let a woman take your house. Diane's face was crimson now. And suddenly, everything clicked. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about Mark. This was about her ex-husband. Diane had been screwed over in a divorce. And now, she was trying to make sure it didn't happen to Mark, even though there was no reason to believe it ever would. I took a slow step forward. You weren't trying to protect Mark. You were trying to protect yourself. Diane let out another forced laugh, but it was weaker this time. That's ridiculous. I tilted my head. Then why did you cross my name off the contract and put his? If it was really for Mark, why didn't you put both our names? Her jaw locked. I stepped closer. Because you plan to take it from him. Diane exploded. Dio, you think I'm stupid? She screeched. I know how this ends. First it's, oh, the house is mine, then it's divorce papers, then my son is left with nothing. Mark's fists clenched. Jesus Christ, Mom. You think my marriage is going to end up like yours? Diane threw her hands up. You never know. Men get screwed over all the time. I was trying to protect you. By stealing our house? I snapped. She whirled toward me, pointing a shaking finger in my face. You don't deserve this house. You don't deserve my son. I knew from the beginning you were a selfish little. Mark slammed his fist on the counter. That's enough. Diane jumped. I'm not Dad, he said, voice deadly calm. And Opie is not you. We're not getting divorced, and even if we did, you don't get a say in our house. You were never part of this. For the first time, Diane looked scared. But then, her fear turned into something else. Something dangerous. She took a slow breath, and then, with a sickeningly sweet smile, she said, We'll see about that. And that's when I realized, this wasn't over. Diane's words hung in the air like a loaded gun. We'll see about that. The tension in the room shifted again, but this time, it felt more dangerous. Diane wasn't just throwing a tantrum, she was planning something. Mark saw it too. His body went rigid, his hand gripping the counter like he was physically holding himself back. What the hell is that supposed to mean? He asked, his voice like ice. Diane tilted her head, her fake smile never wavering. It means, dear, that I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you don't end up like your father. And that's when I realized she wasn't done. She was just getting started. The next blow for the next 2 weeks, everything seemed quiet. Too quiet. Diane had stormed out of the party that night, humiliated, but something told me she wouldn't give up that easily. Then, one morning, I got an official-looking letter in the mail. A legal document. I tore it open, my stomach already sinking, and when I saw what it was, my blood ran cold. Diane had filed a lawsuit against me. She was trying to claim partial ownership of my house. I couldn't believe what I was reading. The document was filled with outrageous lies, claims that Mark and I had purchased the house together, that I had forged documents to keep it in my name alone, and that Diane had financially contributed to the down payment. It was a complete fabrication. I felt sick. I immediately called Mark. You're not going to believe this, I said, barely able to breathe. When he got home and read the document, his face turned to stone. She's lost her damn mind, he muttered. We knew we had to act fast. We hired a lawyer and pulled every piece of evidence proving the house was mine, bank statements, mortgage documents, even emails between me and my lender. There was no way she could win this case. But it wasn't about winning. It was about harassing me. She wanted to drag this out, make it expensive, make it exhausting. She wanted me to cave. And Mark knew it, too. She's trying to break you, he said, his hands shaking with anger. But she underestimated me. If she wanted war, I'd give her one. The breaking point the day of the court hearing finally came. I expected her to be nervous, maybe even embarrassed that she had taken things this far. But when she walked in, she was smug. Like she had already won. She barely even looked at me, but she squeezed Mark's arm and whispered, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll fix this." Mark ripped his arm away. "You're insane." We sat through 2 hours of legal arguments, during which our lawyer destroyed her case. Every time Diane's lawyer tried to argue that she had contributed financially, we produced evidence proving otherwise. She was backed into a corner. And then, she snapped. "This isn't fair." She shrieked in the middle of the courtroom, standing so abruptly that her chair toppled over. The judge slammed his gavel. "Ma'am, sit down." But she wasn't listening. She whirled on me. "You're a liar. A manipulative little gold digger. You don't deserve this house. You don't deserve my son. You're just like his father's second wife, taking everything and leaving him with nothing." Mark stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "Mom, stop." Diane spun toward him, eyes wild. "I'm doing this for you." And then, in front of everyone, Mark said the words that broke her. "I don't want anything from you. I don't want your help. I don't even want you in my life anymore." Diane froze. The courtroom was so quiet, I swear I could hear her breathing. Mark took a slow step forward, his voice low but firm. "You've been controlling me my whole life. I let it slide because I thought you loved me. But this? Trying to steal from my wife? Lying about it in court? I'm done." Diane's mouth opened and closed like she wanted to speak, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked truly afraid. "Sweetheart," she whispered, reaching for his arm. "I just wanted to protect you." Mark pulled away. "No, you wanted to control me, and I won't let you anymore." Then he turned to me, his face full of regret. "I'm sorry I didn't stop this sooner." I squeezed his hand. "We're stopping it now." And just like that, Diane's world crumbled. The case was thrown out almost immediately. Diane had no legal ground to stand on. The judge even scolded her for wasting the court's time. But it didn't end there. After the hearing, Diane tried everything to get Mark to forgive her. She called, she emailed, she even showed up at his workplace, crying about how she didn't mean for it to go that far. But Mark was done. He blocked her number, stopped responding, told his workplace security not to let her in. And me? I felt relieved. For 5 years, I had put up with her trying to control my marriage, my husband, my life. And now? She had pushed too far. It's been almost a year since that day. Diane is still out of our lives. She tried reaching out a few months ago, sending Mark a long-winded letter about how she was getting help and ready to be a real mother again. He tossed it in the trash without reading past the first paragraph. And as for us? We're stronger than ever. That house, my house, is still mine. And now, it's a home where I don't have to deal with someone trying to steal it out from under me. Diane thought she could manipulate, control, and intimidate her way into getting what she wanted. Instead, she lost everything.